There is a 12-second shot in the first SpongeBob movie where SpongeBob and Patrick, lying on a dry patch of seafloor, slowly begin to shrivel up and die. They are not saved by a hero. They are not saved by a weapon. They are saved by their own tears. The scene plays for laughs, but for a single beat, the show sits completely still with the idea that two children's cartoon characters are dying while smiling at each other. That scene was Stephen Hillenburg's planned goodbye to his entire show. Most people who grew up on SpongeBob never knew that. Most people never knew the town is named after a real nuclear test site either, or that one of the main characters is named after the creator's real wife, or that a 2024 interview quietly confirmed a fan theory that had been haunting the internet for over a decade. Today, we are going through the entire story of SpongeBob SquarePants, from a marine biologist's tide pool comic in 1984 to a song from one 11-minute episode charting on Billboard 35 years later, along with every major theory that grew up around the show. Some silly, some disturbing, and some now officially true. Welcome to Cartoonology. Let us get started. The marine biologist who never meant to make a cartoon. Stephen Hillenburg never set out to be a cartoon guy. That fact alone explains almost everything strange and wonderful about the show you grew up with. The man who built Bikini Bottom spent the first half of his adult life fully convinced he was going to be a scientist, and the weird, specific, slightly off-kilter feeling the show carries in its bones comes from the fact that it was made by someone whose first real love was real animals living in real tide pools. SpongeBob is not, in its DNA, a comedy show that happens to be set underwater. It is an ocean show that happens to be a comedy. The order of those things matters more than most people realize. Hillenburg was born in August of 1961 at Fort Sill in Lawton, Oklahoma, where his father worked for the military. When he was just a year old, the family moved to Orange County, California, where his father took a job as a designer in the aerospace industry. That move is the quiet turning point of the entire story. If the Hillenburgs had stayed in Oklahoma, there is no SpongeBob. Because it was California that put the ocean in front of a kid who was already drawing everything he could see. And it was the Pacific coast that slowly, over years, turned a young artist into a marine biologist. Both of those identities were already living inside him by the time he was a teenager, and neither one of them was willing to lose to the other. When an interviewer later asked Hillenburg what he was like as a kid, he gave one of the most on-brand answers a cartoon creator has ever given. He said he was probably well-meaning and naive, like all kids. That description is, almost word for word, the description of SpongeBob himself. It is not a coincidence. Hillenburg was, in his own quiet way, drawing himself from the very beginning. At 15, he went snorkeling for the first time at Woods Coves in Laguna Beach. He would later describe the feeling as a switch clicking inside him. Something about being under the water, surrounded by creatures that most people on the surface would never see, settled his whole sense of what he wanted to do. He decided he was going to be a marine biologist. He also, stubbornly, refused to give up on being an artist. When his high school teachers noticed this split and tried to nudge him toward a middle path, suggesting he just draw fish for a living, he hated the idea. Drawing fish sounded boring to him. He was more interested in making what he later called weird little paintings. That tension between the careful scientist and the strange artist was going to sit inside him for the next 15 years, and the show you love only exists because he never resolved it. After high school, during a few summers, he worked as a fry cook and lobster boiler at a fast food seafood place up in Maine. Hold on to that detail. The fry cook job that became SpongeBob's entire identity came from the real job Hillenburg held as a kid on the Atlantic coast. The beloved patty-flipping sponge is, in a very real sense, a picture of his creator as a teenager flipping burgers in a beach town. He went to Humboldt State University in Northern California and graduated in 1984 with a degree in natural resource planning with a focus on marine resources. He was not studying animation. He was studying the actual science of the ocean. Right after graduating, he took a job teaching marine biology at a place then called the Orange County Marine Institute, now known as the Ocean Institute, down in Dana Point. He was a real teacher in a real classroom, walking real groups of kids through tide pool ecology, the history of ships, and the way sea creatures adapt to their environments. He taught there for 3 years, and in his own words, he was struck during that time by how much kids loved undersea life. They were especially hooked on tide pool creatures, That observation, written down years later, became the whole thesis of SpongeBob SquarePants before the show even existed. While he was teaching, one of the education directors at the institute asked him if he would be interested in making an educational comic book about tide pool animals, something they could hand out to students to help them learn. Hillenburg said yes. He wrote and illustrated a book called The Intertidal Zone. It was never published in the normal sense. It was a teaching tool. It featured a cast of sea creatures drawn as cartoon versions of themselves, each one explaining something about how their species lived. The host and co-host of the comic was a character named Bob the Sponge, who actually looked like a real sea sponge, lumpy and round and shapeless. This is not the SpongeBob we know yet. This is the grandfather of the SpongeBob we know. But the seed is here. An animated sponge built specifically to be funny and friendly enough to teach kids about the ocean already existed in the mid-1980s, sitting in a classroom at a marine institute, waiting. Hillenburg taught for 3 years, and then came to a difficult personal decision. He loved the ocean, but he was starting to realize he loved art more. He wanted to tell stories. So in 1987, he decided to step away from the teaching job that had shaped his whole professional life, and in 1989, he enrolled at the California Institute of the Arts in Valencia, California, to study experimental animation. He earned his master's degree in 1992. In the same year, he won an award for Best Animated Concept at the Ottawa International Animation Festival for a short film called Wormholes, a piece inspired by the theory of relativity. None of this is the SpongeBob story, yet, but it is the moment a scientist fully became an artist, without ever losing the scientist inside him. After graduating, Hillenburg was noticed by a man named Joe Murray, the creator of a Nickelodeon cartoon called Rocko's Modern Life, about a wide-eyed wallaby trying to survive everyday life in a strange city. Murray hired Hillenburg, and from 1993 to 1996, Hillenburg worked on Rocko, first as a director, then eventually as creative director for the show's final season. This is where he learned how to run an animated show. This is where he met many of the people who would later help him build Bikini Bottom. There is even an episode of Rocko he co-wrote and directed called Fishin' Chumps, where 2 sea creatures under the water try to catch the main characters with a fishing line, completely flipping the usual direction of a fishing story. Looking back, that episode is almost a preview of the way Hillenburg's brain works. The point of view is always from under the water, looking up. When Rocko ended in 1996, Hillenburg had a choice to make. He could move on to another animation gig, or he could finally try to build the thing that had been sitting inside him since his teaching days. He chose the second path. He pulled out his old comic book, The Intertidal Zone, and he started reworking Bob the Sponge. The first thing he did was change the shape. In the original comic, Bob looked like a real sponge, all soft and lumpy. Hillenburg tried drawing a household kitchen sponge instead, a plain square one, and the second he did, he knew he had something. A square sponge just looked funnier. It looked like a little guy. It looked like a character. The naming went through a bump. The original pitch name was Sponge Boy, but a mop company already owned the rights to that name, so Hillenburg had to change it. He considered simply calling the character Sponge, but he worried that kids, who already might not know what a sponge was, would mistake the character for a piece of cheese. The word sponge had to stay in the name, so he swapped boy for Bob. SpongeBob SquarePants was the result. A name that is basically 3 jokes layered on top of each other, and a name that, once you hear it, you cannot forget. The pitch meeting at Nickelodeon in 1997 is one of the great stories in television history. Hillenburg did not walk in with a regular slideshow or a normal script presentation. He walked in dressed in a Hawaiian shirt. He brought a small fish tank into the boardroom. He had a tape of Hawaiian music playing in the background. He talked the executives through the creatures he had been designing, and at a certain point, he placed a cartoon drawing of SpongeBob into the tank and said, "This is SpongeBob, the star of your new show." The idea of pitching a cartoon by recreating the feeling of being under the water was, at the time, unlike anything any network had ever seen. It worked. The executives were interested, but they had a demand, and it is the demand that almost killed the whole show. Nickelodeon executives told Hillenburg they would only greenlight the project if he agreed to make SpongeBob and his friends into children, attending school together as kid characters. Hillenburg did not want this at all. He had designed SpongeBob as an adult, a working-class fry cook, someone who lived on his own and had a job and paid bills. The whole point of the character was that he was the most innocent adult you had ever met. Hillenburg was so unwilling to give this up that he was ready to walk away from the deal and give up on the show entirely. But then he came up with a middle ground sound answer. He would keep SpongeBob as an adult, with a house and a job, but he would also put him in a boating school, where he was constantly learning to drive a boat and constantly failing. This compromise is why SpongeBob goes to Mrs. Puff's school every day. That entire part of the show only exists because of a negotiation Hillenburg had with network executives about whether his main character was allowed to be grown up. The show was greenlit, a pilot was made. It was called Help Wanted, and it is, in its way, the cleanest and simplest introduction any long-running cartoon has ever had. SpongeBob wakes up in a pineapple, gets dressed, goes to the Krusty Krab, asks for a job, meets Squidward and Mr. Krabs, and through a series of silly kitchen disasters, proves he is the best fry cook in Bikini Bottom. The pilot aired as a sneak peek after the Kids' Choice Awards on May 1st, 1999, and the show officially premiered on July 17th, 1999. Over the next several months, the show became the biggest animated hit on Nickelodeon. It crossed over from kid audiences to teenagers, and then, quickly, to college students, who started organizing viewing parties. The show was never planned as an adult show. It just turned out that adults could not stop watching it either. What makes Hillenburg's origins so important is that every weird, specific choice you love about SpongeBob is traceable back to a real thing in his real life. The show is set under the water because Hillenburg studied the ocean. SpongeBob is a fry cook because Hillenburg was a fry cook. The Krusty Krab is run by a red-haired, loud, slightly pirate-sounding boss because Hillenburg actually had a boss like that in Maine. The characters each behave like particular tide pool creatures because Hillenburg actually knew in deep scientific detail how those creatures behaved. The theme song is a sea shanty because Hillenburg loved sea shanties. The show is not random. It is a marine biologist drawing his own life, using the animals he studied as the language. One more quiet detail worth knowing before we move on. Hillenburg himself provided one of the voices you hear in the show. During the opening sea shanty song, when the pirate character Painty the Pirate sings along, the mouth you are watching belongs to a real person filmed on top of an animated pirate face, and the voice you hear is the voice of Patrick Pinney, but the mouth itself, the lips that move along to the shanty, those are Stephen Hillenburg's. Every single episode of the show, right at the start, before you have even sat down, you are looking at the creator's actual face, smiling and mouthing along to the song that begins his life's work. Most people have watched this hundreds of times in their lives without knowing. It is one of the most touching hidden signatures in television history. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And this is where the true story starts to get strange, because everything you have just read is the clean, public, verified history of how the show got made. It is the version Hillenburg himself told in interviews. But there is another origin story about Bikini Bottom, a much older and much darker one, buried right there in the name of the town itself. A story about real explosions, real history, and a theory that sat in internet corners for over a decade before one of the show's own writers finally admitted out loud that it was true all along. Section 2. Bikini Bottom is a post-nuclear mutation zone. There is a reason the town in SpongeBob is called Bikini Bottom. Most kids who grew up on the show assumed the name was just a silly rhyme, something Hillenburg made up because it sounded goofy and fit the vibe of a cartoon about a sponge in underwear. For years, that is how the show presented itself, and for years, that is how the audience took it. The truth is much older, much stranger, and much darker than the cartoon ever let on. The name is a real place, and the real place has a history that explains why every single creature living at the bottom of the sea in that show can talk, walk, wear clothes, drive, cook, play instruments, and build robots. Bikini Atoll is a real chain of coral islands in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, part of the Marshall Islands. It sits in the vast open water between Hawaii and Australia, thousands of miles from any major continent. In 1946, shortly after the end of the Second World War, the United States government decided to use those islands as a testing ground for nuclear weapons. The people living on Bikini Atoll were moved from their homes. The islands were cleared. Over the next 12 years, from 1946 to 1958, the American military set off 23 nuclear bombs at Bikini Atoll, some in the air above the islands, some on the land, and at least one directly underwater. The underwater test was famous. It was called Baker, and it produced one of the most iconic and terrifying photographs of the nuclear age. A huge umbrella-shaped cloud of water rising from the surface of the lagoon. This is the real backdrop of the fictional Bikini Bottom. The cartoon town sits, by its own name, directly below one of the most radiation-soaked patches of ocean on the planet. The theory that grew out of this realization is very simple. The reason the creatures in that show are the way they are is because they were exposed to the fallout from those tests. They are mutants, not monsters, not villains, just everyday sea animals that were changed by what happened above them. Sandy is a squirrel in a diving suit. SpongeBob is a cleaning sponge with a face. Patrick is a starfish who wears shorts and has conversations. Gary meows like a cat. Every single one of these characters, the theory argues, is what you get when nuclear radiation rewrites sea life. The theory first took real shape on a forum post on Reddit, written by a user named Capmaster. The post laid out the connection in clean, careful steps. The name of the real location matched the name of the fictional town. The timing of the nuclear tests lined up with a world where sea creatures now had human-like minds. The visual evidence in the show itself supported the idea because almost every large explosion drawn in a SpongeBob episode replicated that same famous umbrella-shaped cloud from the Baker test. Once the post went up, the theory spread across the internet like wildfire. It was too clean to dismiss. It answered a question most kids had never even thought to ask, which was, why exactly do the fish at the bottom of the ocean need jobs? Individual details about each character started fitting into the theory with unnerving ease. Sandy Cheeks is the most obvious example. She is a land squirrel who lives in an air-filled dome under the water. In the original Bikini Atoll tests, the American Navy kept small animals aboard its test ships, and among them were rodents, including chipmunks, used as test subjects to study the effects of radiation on small mammals. Sandy is not, under this reading, a tourist who moved to Bikini Bottom because she liked the view. She is the descendant of a test animal. Her protective suit is not a cute costume, it is a survival requirement. Her incredible strength when she hibernates, her ability to do karate that is unreasonable for a squirrel to possess, her genius-level scientific mind, these all become evidence. Rock bottom is another favorite piece of the theory. In the famous Season 1 episode, SpongeBob and Patrick accidentally take the wrong bus home from an amusement park and end up in a town called Rock Bottom, which sits even deeper down than Bikini Bottom. The residents of Rock Bottom are weirder, smaller, more unsettling, and speak with a strange spitting accent that SpongeBob cannot understand. Under the nuclear theory, Rock Bottom is the crater. It is the actual hole in the seafloor left by an underwater blast. The creatures who live there are more heavily changed, more unusual looking, and more distant from their original forms because they are living inside the spot where the explosion happened. The ones up in Bikini Bottom are mutated. The ones in Rock Bottom are mutated even more. The theory has sat in internet forums for years, sometimes gaining ground, sometimes losing it, usually treated as a fun idea that was way too dark to actually be true. In 2015, Tom Kenny himself, the voice of SpongeBob, was asked about the nuclear theory in an interview and flatly denied it. He told people it was not real and that the show was not about that. For almost a decade after that, Kenny's denial was the final word. Fans who kept pushing the theory were told, again and again, that the voice of the main character had shut the door on the whole thing. And then, in December of 2024, the door opened again, and what walked out was stunning. A video interview was released by Esquire magazine featuring all the main cast members of SpongeBob SquarePants together in the same room, talking about the show and answering fan questions. During that interview, Roger Bumpus, the voice of Squidward, casually brought up the nuclear testing theory. He said, very clearly, that he always liked the theory that the whole thing was related to the atomic testing at Bikini Atoll. He said it the way fans say it, as something fun to kick around. Then, Mr. Lawrence spoke. Mr. Lawrence is not just the voice of Plankton. He has been one of the show's most important writers for years. He has been part of the room where the scripts get made. When he opened his mouth to answer Bumpus, he said a sentence that rewrote the show's entire foundation. He said that the theory was true. He said it was absolutely true. He repeated himself, making sure there was no mistake about what he was saying. Bumpus, stunned, pointed out that he had been telling fans for years that it was not true, and Lawrence said, again, no, it is true. He then added that part of the fun of making the show had been figuring out how far to take the concept of Bikini Bottom being a nuclear test site. That is a writer confirming, on the record, that the cartoon town sitting beneath the real nuclear test site is, in fact, meant to exist in a world shaped by those tests. Everything about the show, the talking creatures, creatures, the underwater fires, the boats that drive like cars, the buildings made from ship funnels, the campfires that burn at the bottom of the sea, the sheer impossibility of any of it can be explained by the same single cause. The bombs did this. But Mr. Lawrence did not stop there, and this is where the theory shifts from fun to genuinely unsettling. He went further in the interview. He said that the original intention behind the world of SpongeBob was even darker than fans had suspected. He said that the world upstairs, meaning the surface world where humans live, is gone. He said that Bikini Bottom is all that is left. In his version of the show's deep backstory, human civilization has been wiped out by some kind of nuclear event, and the sea creatures down below, changed by that same event, are now the last community still alive and functioning on Earth. SpongeBob, under this reading, is a show about a tiny yellow sponge happily flipping burgers in the last living town on the planet, unaware that the old world above him has been silent for a very long time. This framing creates problems with the rest of the show, and it is worth being honest about them. The post-apocalypse version Lawrence described does not fully line up with what the show has actually put on screen over the years. Humans show up in SpongeBob multiple times, clearly alive and well. In the Season 2 episode Frankendoodle, a human artist is shown sitting in a rowboat on the surface, sketching the scenery, when his pencil falls into the water and lands between SpongeBob and Patrick. In the 2004 movie, David Hasselhoff appears as himself, shirtless, tan, and ready to carry the boys back to Bikini Bottom on his chest. Patchy the Pirate, played by Tom Kenny, lives in the real world and is shown interacting with live-action environments throughout dozens of special episodes. So the version where all humans are dead cannot be perfectly true. But the core of what Lawrence said, the part about the nuclear testing being the cause of Bikini Bottom, is now officially canon. That part is no longer a fan theory. It is a confirmed piece of the show's backstory. Once you know this, a lot of the show starts to look different. The opening moments of almost every major explosion in SpongeBob now carry weight. When something blows up in the show, the cloud that rises from the blast is frequently drawn in the exact mushroom and umbrella shape of the Baker test photograph. This is not an accident. The animators have been quietly referencing the real bomb shape every time a comedic explosion happens on screen. There is a joke buried in the visual design of the show that most of its audience has been looking at for 25 years without catching it. Places in the show start to read differently too. New Kelp City, which the show has presented as a big urban area elsewhere under the sea, fits neatly into the theory as another survivor town, another community that adapted after the tests. Shell City, which SpongeBob and Patrick travel to in the first movie, sits on the beach, showing what happens to sea creatures when they leave the changed, wet world below and try to live in the dry world above. They shrivel up, they turn into decorations, they become souvenirs. The surface is not safe for them. The surface kills them. In the logic of the confirmed theory, this makes complete sense. They are built for the place the bombs changed. They cannot live anywhere else. Even the food starts to fit. The Chum Bucket, Plankton's failing restaurant, sells chum. In the real world, chum is made of chopped up fish parts used as fishing bait. The fact that Plankton serves this to his fellow sea creatures has always been a little off, a little unsettling if you stop to think about it. In a post-nuclear world where nothing works quite the way it used to, where the food chain has been scrambled, where creatures that should not be eating each other sometimes do, the Chum Bucket stops being just a joke about a bad restaurant and starts feeling like a sign of how broken the system really is. The theory also explains a question nobody usually thinks to ask, which is why any human in the show who happens to see SpongeBob is not more surprised. In the movies, when live-action humans spot SpongeBob and Patrick, they react with mild confusion at most, never with the shock you would expect from a person seeing a talking sponge for the first time. Under the confirmed nuclear theory, this makes sense. Humans in this world have known for a long time that strange things happened in the waters around Bikini Atoll. The weirdness of the sea creatures below is not news to them. It is history. And then there is the final piece of the theory, the one that is hardest to sit with once you hear it. If the theory is true, and one of the show's key writers has now said that it is, then the bright, happy, endlessly optimistic world of SpongeBob SquarePants is actually a story about the aftermath of something terrible. Every joke, every song, every Krabby Patty, every jellyfish hunting afternoon is happening on top of a history of destruction that the characters themselves may not even fully remember. The innocence of SpongeBob, the part of him that is always cheerful, always ready, always sure that tomorrow will be the best day ever, takes takes on a different weight when you realize what the town he lives in was built on. He is not innocent because nothing bad has ever happened in his world. He is innocent because he is living through the long, strange morning after something bad, and he has chosen, in his small sponge way, to face that morning with hope. This is the hidden shape of the show, a cartoon that spent 25 years being loved as a silly comedy about a square yellow fry cook was, all along, sitting on top of a real piece of 20th century history, one of the darkest chapters of the nuclear age. The writers knew, the creator knew. The joke about the explosion shapes has been staring at the audience since 1999, and now, finally, in a sit-down interview that most fans have not even watched, one of the show's own writers has admitted the whole thing out loud. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. So the town exists, the creatures exist, the theory is confirmed, but none of that tells you anything about who these characters actually are, why they look the way they look, or where the faces you grew up loving actually came from. Because behind every single one of them, from the grumpy octopus next door to the tiny green villain across the street, there is a real person, a real job, or a real moment in Hillenburg's own life that they are quietly based on. And one of those real-life sources was, of all things, a former army cook with a heavy accent from the coast of Maine. Section 3. Building Bikini Bottom. Characters, inspirations, and the real people behind them. Every character you grew up watching on SpongeBob is based on something real, not in a vague, artistic inspiration way, but in a concrete, traceable way. Mr. Krabs is a real man Hillenburg worked for. Karen is a real woman he married. Pearl came from a real animal skeleton hanging on a wall. Squidward is the way he is because of a specific thing Hillenburg knew about octopus anatomy, and one of the most beloved characters in the show almost did not exist at all because she was added to the series after the original pitch was already written. This section is about where these people came from, who they actually are, and why the cast of Bikini Bottom holds together so perfectly, even though each member was pulled from a completely different corner of Hillenburg's real life. Start with Mr. Krabs, because his origin is the most specific and the most surprising. When Hillenburg was a teenager, working summers at that fast food seafood restaurant in Maine, the place was run by a manager he never forgot. The man was short, red-haired, built like a small wall of muscle, and he had been a cook in the army before he came to run the restaurant. His accent was thick Maine coastal, the kind of accent that sounds, to outsiders, almost like a pirate. That single person, that one real-life boss from a teenage summer job, is the entire blueprint for Eugene Krabs. The red body, the small tough build, the way he bosses around his employees, the weirdly pirate-like speech pattern, all of it is a direct portrait. When Clancy Brown was cast to voice Mr. Krabs, the note he was given was to layer a slightly Scottish quality on top of the pirate-style voice, to give the character that over-the-top seafaring flavor. But underneath that layer, the bones of the performance are a real army cook from the coast of Maine who once told a teenage Stephen Hillenburg what to do in a kitchen. The money obsession, the yelling, the way Krabs treats his employees like the whole restaurant would fall apart without his constant supervision, all of that came from a real workplace Hillenburg actually lived through. Squidward's design is rooted in something much more scientific, which makes sense given that Hillenburg spent his teaching years explaining sea life to kids. Hillenburg did not make Squidward a squid, he made him an octopus. The show calls him an octopus inside the series itself, and Hillenburg has explained exactly why in interviews. Octopuses, in real life, have a large bulbous part at the top of their body called a mantle. It looks, at a glance, like a big round head. Hillenburg wanted Squidward to be a character who thought of himself as smart, artistic, sophisticated, a real intellectual, even though nobody around him agreed. So he picked the sea creature with the biggest, roundest, most head-shaped top half because it matched the ego of the character. Squidward thinks he is intelligent, so he was given a body part that looks like a huge brain container. It is a visual joke built directly out of real ocean biology. The tentacle count is a separate story. In real life, octopuses have 8 tentacles. Squidward only has 6. Hillenburg originally designed him with the full 8, but when the animators tried drawing him that way, they ran into a practical problem. 8 limbs was too many for clean, quick, consistent animation. Squidward kept looking tangled and heavy in early sketches, so they cut 2. The number 6 had no scientific reason. It was not a design choice about meaning. It was a purely practical decision to make the character easier to draw hundreds of times across hundreds of episodes. If you grew up confused about why Squidward did not have the expected number of limbs, now you know. It was an animation studio doing the math on how many lines their artists could draw in a day. Pearl crabs comes from one of the most unusual places in the whole show. When Hillenburg was working at the Ocean Institute down in Dana Point, his job involved supervising whale watching trips out on the open ocean. He spent a lot of time looking at whales, both in the water and in the teaching materials the Institute used. One of those teaching materials was a real whale skeleton mounted at the Institute itself. Looking at that skeleton over and over, Hillenburg was struck by how enormous the head of a whale is compared to the rest of its body. He was especially interested in sperm whales, which in real life have the largest brain of any animal on Earth. When he designed Pearl, he drew her with a head that is far too big for the rest of her body, shaped almost like a perfect geometric block. That design is not a random cartoon exaggeration. It is a direct reference to the actual proportions of a sperm whale skull. Pearl's voice actress, Lori Allen, made her own contribution during the audition. She saw the early drawings, noticed how much bigger Pearl was compared to the other characters, and decided to give the voice a deep, full, rolling quality. She also layered in the low hum of real whale vocalizations, the long, slow sounds whales make underwater. On top of that, she kept a bratty, spoiled, teenage girl edge. The result is a character whose voice sounds teenage and whale at the same time. Karen the computer has the sweetest origin of any character in the show. In 1998, the same year he was in the middle of developing SpongeBob, Hillenburg married a woman named Karen Umland. She was a chef who taught at a cooking school in California. Hillenburg once said she was the funniest person he knew. When he created Plankton's robotic wife, the supercomputer who helps run the chum bucket, he named her Karen. That was not a general reference or a loose tribute. He put his actual wife's name on the character. The voice was provided by Jill Talley, an actress from Chicago who uses a subtle Midwestern accent for the role. Electronic sound effects are added on top of her voice during recording to give Karen her robotic tone. Talley and Mr. Lawrence, who voices Plankton, often improvise the dialogue between the two characters, coming up with jokes on the spot during recording sessions. Lawrence has said in interviews that improvising with Talley is his favorite part of the job. The bickering energy between Plankton and Karen, which is one of the most consistent comedic engines of the whole show, is partly the two voice actors riffing at each other in real time. Patrick Starr's voice has a specific and very unexpected source. Bill Fagerbach, who plays Patrick, was cast after Hillenburg had already locked in Tom Kenny as SpongeBob. During Fagerbach's audition, Hillenburg played him a sample of Kenny's performance as SpongeBob, so Fagerbach could hear what he was going to be playing off of. Patrick needed to be a counterpoint to SpongeBob, something slower and denser and heavier in the voice. Fagerbach built the voice from that reference point, but when Patrick is angry, Fagerbach uses a different model entirely. He performs Patrick's rage based on an old Hollywood actress named Shelley Winters. Every time Patrick yells, every time he gets fired up about something, the specific texture of his anger is an imitation of a real human performer who was working in movies decades before SpongeBob was made. This is why Patrick's shouting has that slightly dramatic, slightly theatrical quality to it. It is not random cartoon yelling, it is a carefully chosen vocal reference. Sandy Cheeks has the most surprising creation story because she almost did not make it into the show at all. The original pitch Hillenburg gave to Nickelodeon did not include her. The main cast at that point was SpongeBob, Patrick, Squidward, and Mr. Krabs. Sandy was added later when Hillenburg was writing the series Bible, which is the full reference document a creator puts together for a new show. He decided the cast needed a new kind of friend for SpongeBob, someone from outside the underwater world. So he invented a squirrel from Texas who lived in an air-filled glass dome. Hillenburg has also revealed, in interviews after the show had been running for years, that one of his earliest ideas for Sandy was to make her SpongeBob's girlfriend. That plan was quietly dropped. The show ended up treating them as close friends, with occasional hints of affection, but never committing to a romance. Sandy's karate, her science career, her strong Texas pride, her deep-sea diving helmet, all of those details were developed to make her a character who could carry her own stories separate from the main boys. Without that late addition to the cast, the show would be missing one of its most important voices. Plankton has an origin that nobody would have guessed by watching the show. When the series began, Mr. Lawrence was only brought on to voice a variety of small, minor characters. Plankton was one of those minor characters, and he was only meant to appear in one episode. He was not designed to be a main villain. He was a throwaway character, a one-episode joke. Nickelodeon executives liked the idea idea of Plankton so much that they wanted to turn him into a bigger part of the show, and they even wanted Hillenburg to cast a famous celebrity for the voice. Hillenburg refused. He kept Mr. Lawrence, the tiny, green, constantly scheming villain you know today. The character who has been the show's main antagonist for over 2 decades was almost a blip in one episode, and his voice was almost handed over to a Hollywood name. The fact that Plankton is what he is today is because Hillenburg fought to keep a minor voice actor in a minor role, and then watched that role grow into one of the most beloved characters in the entire cast. The foundational comedy voice of the show, the one that shaped SpongeBob himself more than any other single reference, comes from 2 classic comedy teams. Hillenburg has said in interviews that he loved watching Charlie Chaplin and the old Laurel and Hardy shorts. He was drawn to the specific type of character Stan Laurel played, the naive one, the well-meaning one, the innocent one, the character who does not quite understand how mean the world is, but keeps showing up anyway. That type of character, the sweet guy in a cynical world, is exactly what SpongeBob is. Derek Dryman, one of the earliest writers on the show, has described how he and Hillenburg would watch Laurel and Hardy clips together during development, with Hillenburg pointing out specific moments he loved and wanted to capture in SpongeBob. One of the shorts they studied closely was a 1932 piece called Toad in a Hole, in which Laurel is put in a small room as punishment, and instead of getting upset, he entertains himself by drawing on the walls and playing tic-tac-toe alone. Hillenburg was moved by how the character amused himself in confinement, like a kid sent to the corner who decides the corner is fine. That quality, that ability to find joy in a situation most people would find dull or sad, is built directly into SpongeBob's personality. It is the reason he can be put in almost any setting and start enjoying it immediately. He is Stan Laurel in a kitchen sponge body. The French narrator deserves a quick mention too, because his origin is another one-to-one real-life reference. The unseen narrator who introduces episodes in that gentle, French-accented, nature documentary voice is a direct tribute to Jacques Cousteau, the real French oceanographer and filmmaker whose nature documentaries Hillenburg loved as a child. Hillenburg has said Cousteau's films were a major reason he fell in love with the ocean in the first place. The French narrator is his way of thanking the man who made him want to be a marine biologist by putting a Cousteau-style voice at the start of every episode of a show about marine life. Mrs. Puff's character was shaped in part by the network compromise we talked about earlier. Since Hillenburg had to give Nickelodeon a version of SpongeBob that involved school, Mrs. Puff became the teacher in that school. She is a pufferfish, which is a real fish that puffs up when it gets scared. Every time Mrs. Puff inflates in the show, usually after another one of SpongeBob's driving disasters, the animation is referencing the actual defense mechanism of a real pufferfish. It is not a cartoon invention. It is a biology lesson smuggled into a joke about a bad student. What makes the cast of Bikini Bottom so sturdy, so lovable, so memorable, is that every single one of them is rooted in something specific. The boss who yells, the neighbor who thinks he is better than everyone, the wife who runs the brain of the operation, the daughter who is bigger than life, the friend from somewhere else, the villain who was supposed to be forgettable, the sweet innocent main character who is really a gentleman from a 1930s comedy film wearing a sponge suit. These are not random animals Hillenburg drew. These are pieces of his life, his job history, his marriage, his childhood influences, his time in a classroom, his summers in Maine, assembled into a world he could finally draw after 40 years of preparation. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. That is the clean version of how the cast was made. But behind the visible personalities of these characters, there is a second reading of them that has followed the show almost since the beginning. It is a reading that takes each of the main cast members and lines them up against something far older than any cartoon, older than television, older than the very idea of a sitcom. A list of 7 specific human failings. A list that the show has quietly, and possibly even intentionally, been playing with for over 20 years. Section 4, The 7 Deadly Sins. Live in Bikini Bottom. A long time before SpongeBob ever aired, a long time before television, a long time before even movies existed, Christian teachers had already written a famous list of 7 human faults that they believed would destroy a person if left unchecked. The list is called The 7 Deadly Sins, and it is one of the oldest character mapping tools in Western storytelling. Writers have used it for centuries to build casts of characters. Each person in a story gets one of the 7 faults, and together they form a full portrait of human weakness: greed, envy, pride, sloth, wrath, gluttony, lust. 7 faults, 7 characters, 1 full human picture. For years, a theory has floated around the internet that the main cast of SpongeBob SquarePants is built on this exact template, that each one of the characters you know is secretly a walking example of one of those 7 faults. And in December of 2024, during the same cast reunion interview where the nuclear theory was confirmed, Mr. Lawrence addressed this theory too. What he said did not fully confirm it, but it did not deny it either. He said the idea was that it was like the 7 deadly sins. He compared it to Gilligan's Island, where each character on that show represents a certain type of person. He said all the SpongeBob characters represent a specific kind of thing. Then he stepped back a little, saying the connection was not as tight as pairing each character to a single named fault. His wording was careful. He neither sealed the theory shut nor opened it wide. He said enough to tell the audience that yes, the main cast was built to each represent something, and that something was shaped by the same kind of thinking behind the 7 deadly sins list. That partial confirmation is enough to take the theory seriously, and once you look at the characters with this list in mind, the pairings line up with almost shocking tidiness. Start with Mr. Krabs, because he is the easiest. Mr. Krabs is greed. The show has never hidden this. Greed is the selfish hunger for wealth at the expense of other people, and Mr. Krabs is the walking, talking, claw-rubbing definition of it. He hoards his money. He underpays his fry cook. He cries at the sight of a spare penny. He has endangered his employees' lives multiple times over small amounts of money. In the season 2 episode Squid on Strike, Squidward and SpongeBob actually organize a protest against him because of his tight-fisted treatment of workers. In Jellyfish Hunter, he manipulates SpongeBob into catching every jellyfish in the fields just so he can farm their jelly into a new product. In the episode Can You Spare a Dime, when Squidward quits his job and becomes homeless, Mr. Krabs refuses to give up a single coin to help him. The character is not incidentally greedy. He is built out of greed, top to bottom. Roger Bumpus, the voice of Squidward, singled out Mr. Krabs as one of the 2 characters in the theory whose match was obviously correct. Patrick Star is sloth. Sloth is the sin of laziness, of doing nothing when you could be doing something. This is Patrick from his first appearance to his most recent. He lives under a rock, literally. His home is a rock, flipped over, with a bed and a television tucked underneath. He does not work. He rarely has a real job. He spends most of his waking hours doing as little as possible. His most famous character achievement, shown in the episode Big Pink Loser, is when he wins an actual trophy awarded to him for doing absolutely nothing for the longest period of time. The show is making the joke directly. Patrick is so proudly lazy that laziness has become his identity. In episode after episode, when SpongeBob is scrambling to get something done, Patrick is the character who is still lying there. His speech is slow. His movement is slow. He forgets things constantly, and the theory has argued that even his famous forgetfulness is a form of laziness, because he cannot be bothered to remember. Bumpus, in that same reunion, said Patrick's match was also an obvious hit. Patrick and laziness are fused together so completely that it is hard to separate them, which is the exact point. Squidward is wrath. Wrath is anger, hatred, the uncontrolled rage that burns a person from the inside. Squidward's whole personality is built on this. He hates his job at the Krusty Krab. He hates his neighbor. He hates his coworker. He hates the town, the customers, the noise, the food, the music other people like, and the fact that he is forced to live surrounded by characters who do not share his taste. In the episode Dying for Pie, Squidward believes he has accidentally given SpongeBob a pie that is actually a bomb, and the episode sits with his quiet horror at what he has done, which is a surprisingly dark place for a kids show to go. That plot exists because Squidward's anger towards SpongeBob is so well established that the idea of him accidentally killing his coworker is believable. In the episode Reef Blower, the very first sequence after the pilot, Squidward's entire character is established in 3 silent minutes of growing rage over a single pile of sand on his lawn. Rage is not a side feature of Squidward. Rage is Squidward. Every sarcastic remark, every slammed door, every heavy sigh, every angry clarinet blast is another drop in the same overflowing bucket. Plankton is envy. Envy is the sin of wanting what someone else has and being unable to find peace until you take it from them. This is the single driving force of Plankton's character across the entire show. He wants what Mr. Krabs has. He wants the customers, customers, the restaurant, the famous burger, the success, the respect, the fortune. He has his own restaurant, the Chum Bucket, across the street. He has a wife. He has a laboratory full of inventions. He is, by most measures, a smart, accomplished character, and none of it is enough because he cannot stop looking across the street at what his rival has. The Season 3 episode, The Algae's Always Greener, is the perfect proof of this pairing. In that episode, Plankton uses a machine to swap his life with Mr. Krabs for a day. He gets everything he has ever wanted. He has the Krusty Krab, he has the money, he has the customers, and within hours, he is miserable. The burdens of running a successful business overwhelm him. Even when he gets exactly what he wants, he is still not satisfied. That episode is a direct portrait of envy as a trap. The wanting is the whole disease, and getting the thing does not cure it. Gary the Snail is gluttony. Gluttony is the overindulgence in food, the inability to stop eating or consuming. Gary is a pet, and his entire relationship with SpongeBob is built around being fed. One of the most repeated lines in the early seasons of the show is SpongeBob reminding himself, or someone reminding him, to feed Gary. In the episode, Have You Seen This Snail?, SpongeBob forgets to feed Gary, and Gary actually runs away from home in search of someone who will feed him properly. The episode is played for real emotional weight. Gary's need for food is so central to his life that going without it drives him to abandon his owner. Even the design of the character leans into it. Gary's body is mostly stomach, wrapped inside a shell, always hungry, always begging, always waiting for the next bowl. Sandy Cheeks is pride. Pride is the sin of thinking too highly of yourself, of believing you are above the people around you. Sandy is brilliant, athletic, scientifically accomplished, a trained karate master, and she is fully aware of all of this. She comes from Texas, and her Texas pride is one of the most repeated jokes in the entire show. In the Season 1 episode, Texas, Sandy misses her home so badly that she prepares to move back, and the episode revolves entirely around her defending her home state as the greatest place on Earth. In the Season 2 episode, Squirrel Jokes, when SpongeBob tells jokes at her expense in a comedy routine, she becomes deeply offended and responds with extreme pride, defending her species and her intelligence. In the Season 2 episode, Pressure, she has an entire argument with SpongeBob, Patrick, and Squidward about whether land creatures are better than sea creatures, and spends the whole episode trying to prove it. She believes, at the core of her personality, that she is smarter, tougher, and more capable than everyone around her. She is usually right about this, which is exactly why the pride fits so well. A proud character who is wrong about being superior is one type of joke. A proud character who is actually superior and still shows it off constantly is a different, more uncomfortable type of joke, and that is the Sandy joke. That leaves SpongeBob himself, and this is where the theory becomes strange, because the sin that gets left over after the other 6 are assigned is lust. And on the surface, that pairing makes no sense at all. SpongeBob is the most innocent character on the show. He has no romantic life to speak of. He has never been written as anything close to a lustful character in the usual sense of the word. The theory works around this by using a different definition of the word lust. The older, broader meaning of lust is not just romantic desire. It is any intense, excessive, overwhelming want, a huge eagerness for something. And under that definition, SpongeBob fits. He has an overwhelming, enormous, almost unreasonable lust for life. He loves his job at the Krusty Krab with a kind of intensity that is not normal. He loves his friends so strongly it almost hurts him. He loves jellyfish hunting. He loves bubble blowing. He loves Gary. He loves his pineapple. He loves boating school, even though he keeps failing it. Everything in his life is turned up to the maximum. He wakes up every morning ready. He greets every single day with the same overflowing enthusiasm. Tom Kenny, the voice of SpongeBob, even joked in the same Esquire interview that if SpongeBob had any lust in him, it would just be a lust to work more shifts at the Krusty Krab. That is the theory's answer. SpongeBob's sin is that he wants too much, too strongly, all the time. His overflowing love for the world is so extreme that it pushes past normal joy and becomes something closer to obsession. The sin of wanting more is the only one left, and it ends up belonging to the character who wants the most. There is one complication with the full theory, and it is worth being honest about. Different versions of the theory swap certain characters around. Some fans, especially older versions of the theory, place Pearl in the lust slot, arguing that her teenage obsession with boys and celebrities fits the classic definition. Some place Mrs. Puff in the gluttony slot, citing episodes where she is shown known loving food. Some put Patrick in gluttony instead of sloth because of how much he eats. The mapping is not fixed. Different people have made the theory work with different character arrangements. Mr. Lawrence's response in the interview acknowledged this flexibility. He said each character represents something specific, but that it was not as clean as saying one character is this exact sin and another is that exact sin. He even pointed out that Plankton's main drive looks like envy, but could also be read as pride or wrath, because his character has elements of all three. Squidward could be read as wrath or as pride, depending on the episode. The show, by his account, was built with this kind of character representation idea in mind, but it was never meant to be a rigid, one-to-one checklist. What the theory really reveals, in the end, is the architecture of the show itself. SpongeBob is not a random collection of sea creatures with random personalities. The main cast is built as a matched set, designed so that each character carries a different human weakness. When they interact, they are not just making jokes at each other, they are acting out a much older pattern, the pattern of people with opposite flaws rubbing against each other, the way greed bumps into envy across the street, the way pride and laziness sit next to each other on the couch, the way rage boils over when it has to spend every day standing next to pure, overflowing love. The show stays funny across more than 2 decades because its characters were structured with a kind of ancient precision that most people watching the show have never even noticed. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. This is the clean, intended, partly confirmed version of how the cast is built, but there is a much darker theory about one specific product that the show has always kept mysterious. A single ingredient at the center of the whole restaurant. The special burger that holds Bikini Bottom together. And the theory about what is actually inside it has been one of the most disturbing fan ideas ever attached to a children's cartoon. Section 5. The Krabby Patty Cannibal Theory and the Actual Canon Answer. The most famous food in Bikini Bottom is the Krabby Patty. It is the whole reason the Krusty Krab stays in business. It is the whole reason Plankton tries every episode to steal the recipe. It is the one item on the menu that every single fish in town seems to adore. In the second SpongeBob movie, Krabs says out loud that the Krabby Patty is what ties everyone together, and that without it, there would be a complete breakdown of social order. That is not an exaggeration for the fans. That is the show itself, telling you the burger is the glue of the whole civilization. The recipe for this burger has been one of the longest running secrets in the entire series. No character has ever fully explained what is in it, and that secrecy is exactly what gave birth to one of the darkest fan theories ever attached to a children's cartoon. The theory is short and brutal. The Krabby Patty, fans argued, is made out of crabs, and Mr. Krabs is a crab, which means Mr. Krabs has been feeding his own species to the town for decades and calling it food. Under this reading, the entire Krusty Krab is not just a restaurant. It is the center of a cannibalism scandal that nobody in Bikini Bottom has figured out yet, possibly because the product is too delicious to question. The theory spread across the internet in the late 2000s because the evidence for it looked weirdly strong. Start with the name. The burger is called a Krabby Patty. The owner is named Krabs. That is not a subtle connection. In real-world language, a food is usually named for what is in it. A cheeseburger has cheese. A chicken sandwich has chicken. A Krabby Patty should, by that logic, have crab. Keep going. The restaurant itself is shaped like a wooden box with slats on the sides and a door on the front. That shape, fans pointed out, is the shape of a real crab trap, the kind of wire and wood cage fishermen lower into the water to catch crabs for market. If you assume the restaurant was designed to look like a crab trap on purpose, the Krusty Krab suddenly looks a lot more sinister. It is not a cheerful beachside diner. It is a cage with a fry cook inside. The theory has one more piece of evidence that is hard to shake off, because it comes directly from the show itself. In the season 3 episode, Midlife Crustacean, there is a specific moment where Mr. Krabs takes a bite out of a Krabby Patty. After chewing, he looks at the burger and says, "So that is what I taste like." The line is delivered quickly, played like a throwaway joke, and the episode moves on immediately. For fans who believed in the cannibalism theory, this was treated as a confession hidden in plain sight. The character himself is commenting on the flavor of the burger and comparing it directly to his own body. It is the kind of line that, once you notice it, you cannot unnotice. Every viewing of the show after that point carries the weight of what Mr. Krabs said out loud about his own restaurant. Some versions of the theory theory go even further. A few fans have suggested that the famous secret ingredient in the formula, a substance sometimes referred to in the show as King Neptune's Poseidon powder, is a drug. The argument is that real-world slang sometimes uses words like powder and Poseidon for illegal substances, and that this might be why fish in Bikini Bottom line up every single day for the exact same burger, why they panic when the restaurant is closed, and why the Krabby Patty is treated less like food and more like an addiction. Under this expanded theory, the Krusty Krab is not just cannibalism. It is a drug-pushing operation that uses a burger as the delivery method. This is a stretch, and most fans do not carry the theory this far, but it exists online and it has its own supporters. Another version argues that the meat in the patty is actually imitation crab, which, in the real world, is made out of pulverized fish. Under this reading, Mr. Krabs is not feeding his own species to his customers, but he is doing something almost as bad. He is feeding fish to fish, and since most of the customers lining up at the counter are themselves fish, every single one of them, with every bite, is unknowingly eating their own kind. Under this gentler version of the theory, there are no crabs in the burger, but the whole restaurant still runs on a kind of quiet cannibalism that nobody wants to talk about. The theory became so widespread that it eventually pulled in a real-world response from the people who own the show. In 2017, the official Nickelodeon Instagram account commented directly on a post about the theory. The comment was short. Nickelodeon confirmed 100% that Krabby Patties are not made of crabs. That single sentence was the first time the people who actually run SpongeBob had publicly shut down the theory on the record. For the fans who had been arguing about it for years, the comment was the official answer they had been waiting for. For the fans who loved the theory too much to let it go, the comment only made them dig in harder, arguing that the network would obviously deny it whether or not it was true, because a children's cartoon cannot admit on the record that its main character is a cannibal. The real answer, the behind-the-scenes truth of what is in the Krabby Patty, has been given by several people who actually worked on the show, and it is very different from what the theory imagines. Vincent Waller is one of the current creative leaders of SpongeBob and has worked on the show for years. He has stated, flatly and publicly, that there is absolutely no meat in the Krabby Patty. Not crab meat, not fish meat, not any animal product at all. According to Waller, this was always Steven Hillenburg's plan for the burger from the very beginning. The patty, in canon, has never been made from an animal. This was Hillenburg's personal decision, made early in the show's life, and it has been respected by the writers ever since. Mr. Lawrence, the same writer who confirmed the nuclear theory and addressed the 7 deadly sins theory, has backed this up. Lawrence has said that the writers of SpongeBob are not allowed to show fish being eaten as food. There are a handful of episodes where it is hinted that human fishermen on the surface might catch fish, but the show never directly shows fish eating fish, and no meat is served anywhere in Bikini Bottom except for the chum at Plankton's restaurant. The universe of the show has a rule, and the rule is that sea creatures do not eat each other. Tom Kenny, the voice of SpongeBob, has even joked about what the patty actually is. He said, in his own words, that Krabby Patties are hummus. That was clearly a joke, but it points at the real truth. The patty is not meat. It is something plant-based, something closer to a vegetable burger than anything else. And here's the proof of that on screen. In the second SpongeBob movie, the SpongeBob movie Sponge Out of Water, there is a sequence where the characters end up in the real world, and the Krabby Patty is shown as an actual, live-action, physical object you could hold in your hand. The patty in that movie is clearly a vegetable burger. It is green. It has no meat in it. That single visual decision, seen by millions of people in theaters, is the closest the show has ever come to showing you what the Krabby Patty truly is. It looks exactly like what Hillenburg always said it was, which is a plant-based sandwich, not a crab sandwich, not a fish sandwich, and definitely not anything involving Mr. Krabs' family. There is a separate canon origin story for the Krabby Patty that fans sometimes forget, and it helps explain where all this confusion came from in the first place. In the season 5 episode, Friend or Foe, the show finally pulled back the curtain on the history of the recipe itself. In that episode, Mr. Krabs reveals that he and Plankton were best friends as children. They grew up together in the same poor neighborhood. They were both bullied, Plankton for being a nerd, and Mr. Krabs for being so poor that his mother had to make his clothes out of rags. One day, the two of them decided to go into business together. They opened a tiny burger restaurant at the local dump, and they tried to invent their own signature burger, which they called the Plab Patty, a blend of their two names. The first version of this patty Patty was terrible. It was made with chum, which in the real world is chopped up fish parts used as fishing bait. An old man in the neighborhood tried the first burger and became very sick from it. Mr. Krabs and Plankton blamed each other, got into a screaming fight, and tore the recipe in half during the argument. Plankton grabbed the bottom half of the paper, which had the words "and a pinch of chum" written on it. Mr. Krabs kept the top half, and here is the part that matters. During the fight, as they were screaming at each other, a shelf in the kitchen got knocked over, and a bunch of random ingredients spilled down into the patty mix by pure accident. That accidental mixture of spilled ingredients, without the chum that Plankton had taken, became the actual Krabby Patty recipe. Mr. Krabs did not design it. Plankton did not design it. The recipe that built the whole Krusty Krab empire was an accident caused by two angry kids fighting in a kitchen. This origin story is the show's official canon answer to everything the theory is built on. It explains why Plankton is so obsessed with getting back at Mr. Krabs, because Mr. Krabs walked away from their broken friendship with a recipe that turned him rich and left Plankton with a useless line about chum. It explains why Plankton's restaurant still sells chum, because that was the part of the recipe he took with him the day they split. It explains why the Krabby Patty has no meat in it, because the accidental mix that created it was just a random spill of pantry ingredients. And it explains why the formula is such a closely guarded secret, not because it contains something horrible, but because even Mr. Krabs does not fully know what is in it. The recipe is a happy accident that he got lucky enough to hold on to. There is also one more real-world wrinkle worth knowing. In 2024, Nickelodeon teamed up with the fast food chain Wendy's for a limited-time promotion called the Krabby Patty Collab. Wendy's sold a version of the Krabby Patty as an actual menu item for a few weeks. The Wendy's version was made with beef, which is their standard meat. A group of SpongeBob fans pushed back against this promotion, arguing that it went against what Hillenburg had always wanted for the character. Hillenburg had personally opposed the use of his show to market fast food to children, and he had always imagined the patty as a vegetable burger. The Wendy's promotion, which served a beef version to real customers, went against both of those wishes. The controversy around the collab actually reinforced, in a strange way, the truth about the patty. Fans got upset because they knew what the Krabby Patty was supposed to be. Hillenburg had built it as a vegetable burger on purpose, and the audience could feel the difference when someone tried to replace it with beef. The Mr. Krabs cannibal theory, then, is one of those ideas that is fun to think about, feels impossibly true when you first hear it, and falls apart the moment you look at the actual evidence. The line in Midlife Crustacean is a joke, not a confession. The crab trap shape of the restaurant is a visual gag, not a clue. The name is wordplay, not a recipe. Nickelodeon has denied it directly. The writers have denied it. The animators have denied it. The voice actors have denied it. And the second movie has physically shown you the answer. The Krabby Patty is a vegetable burger, cooked by accident, guarded so carefully because it is worth protecting, not because it is hiding something terrible. But the theory's power is still worth respecting. It tells you how much the audience trusts the show to be hiding something underneath. Fans do not build cannibalism theories about kids' shows they think are shallow. They build them about shows they think are deep. The fact that so many people were willing to entertain the idea that Mr. Krabs was a cannibal says something about how much they believed SpongeBob might contain anything, no matter how strange. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And the strangeness of the show is not a mistake or an accident or a rumor. The early years of SpongeBob really did contain some of the most unusual and carefully built comedy ever made for children's television. The episodes from that first stretch of seasons are why the show became what it became. They are the reason everyone quotes it. They are the reason it is still in the air 25 years later, and they are built on a level of craft that, even now, most people underestimate. Section 6, The Golden Era and the Episodes That Built a Generation. Between 1999 and 2004, SpongeBob SquarePants produced about 60 episodes that people now treat as their own separate piece of television. Fans have a name for this stretch. They call it the Golden Era. It covers the first 3 seasons of the show, ends with the release of the first movie in the fall of 2004, and contains almost every single SpongeBob moment that has gone on to become a meme, a quote, a shared reference, or a line that random people yell at each other in a grocery store for no reason. Understanding this era is the key to understanding why the show matters at all. If the next 2 decades episodes of SpongeBob never happened, these 60 episodes would still be enough to earn the show its place in television history. Part of what makes the Golden Era special is the team that made it. Steven Hillenburg was fully in charge during this period. He was the showrunner for every episode in these 3 seasons. Around him was a tight creative group that included writers like Derek Dryman, Tim Hill, Aaron Springer, Paul Tibbett, Kent Osborne, and C.H. Greenblatt. Most of these people would eventually leave the show after the movie, but during the Golden Era, they were all in the same room, working on scripts together, with Hillenburg signing off on every story. That small group produced something almost unheard of in television, which is dozens of episodes in a row that, even today, are hard to find weak spots in. The most famous product of this era is the Season 2 episode, Band Geeks. It aired on September 7th, 2001. If a single SpongeBob episode had to represent the whole show, this is the one most fans would pick. The plot is simple. Squidward receives a phone call from his old school rival, a wealthy octopus named Squilliam Fancyson. Squilliam has a marching band that was supposed to play at a big sports event called the Bubble Bowl, but they canceled. Squilliam asks Squidward if his band could fill in. Squidward, desperate to impress his rival, lies and agrees, even though he does not actually have a band. He is forced to quickly recruit everyone in Bikini Bottom to be his players, and the whole episode follows their hilarious, terrible attempts to practice. Patrick asks if mayonnaise is an instrument. Mr. Krabs threatens a rival band member. SpongeBob holds everything together with pure determination. In the final moments of the episode, Squidward and his thrown-together band walk onto the biggest stage of his life, expecting complete humiliation. What happens instead is one of the most celebrated moments in the history of cartoon music. The band performs a song called Sweet Victory. It is perfect. The crowd erupts. Squilliam faints from shock. Squidward stands there with a look of pure, shocked pride on his face, experiencing what is probably the best moment of his life. The cultural weight of this ending cannot be overstated. Band Geeks has, for years, been rated as the highest scored SpongeBob episode on IMDb, sitting near a nearly perfect 10 out of 10. In a 2012 online fan vote held by Nickelodeon in the United Kingdom, called SpongeBob's Top 100, fans cast over 160,000 votes to pick their favorite episode, and Band Geeks won. It beat every other episode in the show's entire run at that point. The victory was not even close. After Steven Hillenburg passed away in November 2018, a petition was created on change.org asking the NFL to play Sweet Victory during the halftime show of Super Bowl 53. That petition gathered over 1.1 million signatures. The song actually made a brief appearance in the halftime show that year, though only as a short introduction clip for Travis Scott, which many fans felt was not a full enough tribute. Streams of Sweet Victory still spiked by 566% after the broadcast. That is the power of one 11-minute cartoon episode from 2001. A generation grew up, became adults, and used their collective voice to get a song from a SpongeBob episode played at the biggest sporting event in America. Another Golden Era classic is the Season 3 episode Chocolate with Nuts, which aired in 2002. This one is structured very differently from Band Geeks. There is no big emotional ending. There is no dramatic performance. Instead, the episode is built out of small, strange encounters. SpongeBob and Patrick decide to get rich by selling chocolate bars door to door. As they walk through the neighborhood, they meet one bizarre customer after another. There is a fish who screams the word chocolate at them repeatedly, each time with more intensity. There is an extremely old woman who brings out her even older, extremely tiny mother. There is a sleazy salesman who keeps tricking the two of them into buying useless products. There is a hard-of-hearing fish and her daughter Mary, whose exchange about what the boys are selling has become one of the most quoted scenes in all of SpongeBob history. The episode works because it is not trying to build toward a big payoff. It is just a string of small, weird, perfectly timed comedy bits strung together, each one funnier than the last. Many fans and critics consider it the funniest single episode the show has ever made. Rock Bottom, from Season 1, is another Golden Era essential. In this episode, SpongeBob and Patrick try to catch the bus home from an amusement park and accidentally end up in a much stranger, much deeper town. The town is called Rock Bottom. It is dimly lit. The creatures there are small, odd-looking, and speak with an unusual accent that makes a spitting sound between words, making it almost impossible for SpongeBob to understand anyone. He gets separated from Patrick. He misses bus after bus because the rules of of the bus station do not make sense. Every time he thinks he has figured out where he is supposed to be, the situation shifts. The episode sits on a very strange emotional note, a kind of quiet panic, as SpongeBob grows more and more afraid that he is going to be stuck in this place forever. It is a children's cartoon episode that, if you watch it as an adult, feels uncomfortably close to the feeling of being lost in a strange city at night. The fact that a kids show could get away with something that unsettling and still make it funny is part of what made the early seasons so special. Sailor Mouth, also from season 2, is one of the boldest episodes the show ever put on the air. The plot is that SpongeBob reads a word scribbled on the side of the Krusty Krab dumpster, a word he does not know, and starts using it everywhere. When the word is spoken in the episode, it is bleeped out with the sound of a dolphin chirp. It is obvious to any adult viewer what the word is supposed to be. Mr. Krabs explains to the boys that the word is one of 13 bad words that sailors are not supposed to say. Squidward interrupts him to ask, "Do you not mean there are only 7 bad words?" That is a direct reference to a famous 1972 comedy routine by a real stand-up comedian named George Carlin called 7 Words You Can Never Say on Television. The writers of SpongeBob, in a children's cartoon aired on Nickelodeon, were making a joke about a routine that was once so controversial it ended up in a real court case in the United States. It is a reference that almost no child watching the episode would have understood, placed there specifically for the parents in the room. Sailor Mouth is often pointed to as proof that the early SpongeBob writers were playing to multiple audiences at once, with adult jokes hidden in plain sight on a show aimed at 8-year-olds. Pizza Delivery from season 1 was the episode many fans point to as the moment the show proved itself. Mr. Krabs gets an order for a Krusty Krab pizza, even though the restaurant does not normally sell pizza. He forces SpongeBob and Squidward to deliver it. The two of them end up stranded in a desert area far from home, trying to make their way back with the pizza still intact. The whole episode is just the two of them in an open environment, bouncing off each other, with SpongeBob cheerfully trying to keep them alive and Squidward slowly losing his mind. The writers and animators trusted the two characters to carry a full story with almost no other cast members, and the episode works beautifully. It showed that SpongeBob and Squidward, as a pair, had enough chemistry to carry the whole show for 11 minutes without any of the usual supporting characters. Graveyard Shift, also from season 2, showed that the show could handle scary material without losing its sense of humor. In this episode, Mr. Krabs decides to keep the Krusty Krab open all night to make extra money, forcing SpongeBob and Squidward to work the late hours. Squidward, bored and annoyed, tells SpongeBob a fake scary story about a ghost called the Hash-Slinging Slasher, who supposedly haunts the restaurant when certain signs happen. He makes up every detail of the story to mess with SpongeBob. The horror of the episode comes when every single sign he invented starts actually happening. The lights flicker in the exact pattern he described. The phone rings with heavy breathing on the other end. The bus arrives outside at the exact wrong moment. Squidward becomes more terrified than SpongeBob by the end, because he cannot figure out how his fake story is coming true. The episode works because it plays the scares completely straight. There is real tension, there is real dread, and then the ending pulls the rug out in the most absurd, classic SpongeBob way possible. A children's show that can scare you, make you laugh, and then make you laugh harder at the resolution is doing something most adult shows cannot do. Idiot Box from season 3 is a tiny masterpiece of physical comedy. The plot is that SpongeBob and Patrick order a new television, ignore the actual TV, and spend the whole episode playing inside the cardboard box it came in. Squidward is baffled by this. He watches them from his window, growing more and more frustrated, because from inside his house, he can clearly hear the sounds of a real roller coaster, a real race car, a real wild adventure coming out of the cardboard box. The question of the episode is whether the sounds are real, whether SpongeBob and Patrick are actually using the power of imagination to make real things happen, or whether Squidward is slowly losing his grip on reality. The episode never answers it, and that is what makes it work. It trusts the viewer to sit with the weirdness. There are many more. Squilliam Returns, Wet Painters, Artist Unknown, Frankendoodle, Just One Bite, The Camping Episode, Club SpongeBob, I Had an Accident, Crabborg, Nasty Patty. These are the episodes that fill the middle ranks of fan rankings, every single one of them featuring at least one line, one joke, one scene that has outlived the episode itself itself and turned into a meme, a reaction image, or a phrase that people use in everyday life. One of the reasons all of these episodes work is the visual comedy in them. The early SpongeBob writers did not treat the animation as a delivery system for the words in the script. They treated the images as jokes on their own. The way SpongeBob's face stretches, the way Squidward's neck sags when he is defeated, the way Patrick's eyes go completely empty when he is thinking, the close-up shots on small, strange objects, the sudden shift from a cartoon style to a more detailed, almost painted look during moments of high emotion. These are choices made by a team of artists who understood that children and adults could both laugh at the same image for completely different reasons. A kid laughs at a funny face. An adult laughs at the idea that someone drew that face on purpose. Another reason the Golden Era works is how the show treated its characters. During this stretch of seasons, each main character is given full range. Squidward is annoyed, but he is also occasionally happy. Patrick is stupid, but he is also occasionally insightful. Mr. Krabs is greedy, but he also has moments of real concern for his employees. SpongeBob is innocent, but he is also capable of frustration, sadness, disappointment, and anger. The characters are not yet locked into single traits. They are still full people. That fullness is the secret ingredient that made the early episodes so rewatchable. The audience felt like they were visiting real characters in a real town, not a cast of walking jokes. This is the work that built the show's reputation. This is the work that turned SpongeBob from a network bet on a weird idea into a cultural giant. The people who grew up watching these 60 episodes would go on to be the adults who made SpongeBob one of the most referenced shows in internet history. Every rewatch, every quote thrown into a group chat, every joke built on top of a Band Geek screenshot traces back to these first 3 seasons. The show never had to stay this good forever. It already had done enough. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But something kept happening long after the cameras stopped rolling on those early seasons. Something that quietly haunted this beloved cartoon from its own dark corners of the internet. And it would not stay in those dark corners. It would eventually leak out, echoing back into the show itself, in a way almost nobody noticed at the time. Section 7. The creepypasta that haunted a generation. Squidward's suicide and red mist. In the late 2000s and early 2010s, the internet went through a strange phase. Horror stories written by anonymous users started spreading across forums, message boards, and early social media, and people began calling them creepypastas. The word was a play on copypasta, which was an older internet term for a chunk of text that gets copied and pasted everywhere. A creepypasta was the same idea, but scary. Short horror stories, often written in a plain, first-person voice, designed to be copied from forum to forum until they reached every corner of the online world. Some of them became famous. The most famous one ever attached to a children's cartoon was built around SpongeBob SquarePants, and more specifically, around Squidward. It first appeared on a forum called 7chan in the paranormal section, posted by an anonymous user in the year 2010. The story was titled Squidward's Suicide. It later got a sequel called Red Mist. Together, they became one of the most widely read horror stories of the early internet, and they left a mark on SpongeBob that the show itself eventually, quietly acknowledged. The story is written as a first-person account from someone who claims to have been an unpaid intern at Nickelodeon Studios in 2005. According to the narrator, he and a few other people were asked to watch an early cut of what was supposed to be the season 4 premiere episode. The real episode that was airing that season was called Fear of a Krabby Patty. When they pulled up the file, though, the title card on the screen read something else. It said, Squidward's Suicide. The interns assumed it was a joke. The animators at the studio sometimes put fake, silly titles on early drafts as an inside prank, so they started the tape and figured they were about to watch a normal episode with a weird working title. What they supposedly saw instead, according to the story, was something much darker. The episode began with Squidward practicing his clarinet, hitting the usual wrong notes. SpongeBob and Patrick laughed outside, and Squidward shouted at them to be quiet because he had a concert that night. The first few minutes played out like a real SpongeBob episode. Then, the scene cut to Squidward's actual concert. He performed poorly, and the crowd began booing him. The booing was off, though. It sounded too real, too mean, not like cartoon booing at all. The camera panned across the audience, and this is where the story crosses into horror. Every fish in the crowd, including SpongeBob and Patrick themselves, had eyes that looked weirdly detailed. Not cartoon eyes, not animated drawings. Eyes that looked almost like photographs of real eyes, only with red pupils in the middle. The story describes these as hyper-realistic eyes, and that single phrase has gone on to become one of the most famous and most copied descriptions in the entire history of creepypastas. For years after this story was posted, other lost episode creepypastas would copy the exact same phrase, trying to recreate the same unsettling feeling. The scene then cut to Squidward sitting alone in his bedroom. His face was slowly getting closer to the camera. He started to cry. The crying did not sound like the actor. It sounded like a real person sobbing. The story describes this scene as being uncomfortably long, with the sobs getting louder and fuller of real hurt and anger. The narrator claims that flashes of disturbing images were hidden in the animation during this moment. Images so quick and so horrible that the Nickelodeon team watching were horrified. At some point, a deep voice was heard saying the words, "Do it." The camera pulled back to reveal a weapon in Squidward's hands. A moment later, the scene cuts away. The episode ended with him lying on the bed, and then the screen went black. The story describes the room falling completely silent. Steven Hillenburg himself, according to the narrator, was angry and confused. He demanded to know what had happened. Most of the people in the room left immediately. The story ends with the narrator saying the tape was never fully explained, that the editing had been done by someone unknown, and that the footage itself had caused him nightmares for a long time afterward. That was the end of the original Squidward suicide creepypasta. The sequel, Red Mist, came a few years later and was written by a different author. Red Mist added a new character to the story. In this version, the creator of the haunted tape was given a name, Andrew Skinner, who was described as a disgraced former animator turned serial killer. A mysterious Scottish salesman fish appears at Squidward's door and tells him that the red mist is coming. The sequel added more violence, more specific horror, and tried to give a real-world explanation for who had made the original tape. Most fans agree that the original is the classic, and the sequel is more of a knockoff. But the two stories are often published together online and are treated as a pair. Neither story is true. There is no lost episode. There is no haunted tape. There is no actual Season 4 premiere where Squidward died. The creepypasta is fiction, invented entirely by an anonymous internet user in 2010, written in a style designed to feel like a real insider account. But the impact of the story on SpongeBob culture was huge. For a generation of kids who grew up watching the show, Squidward's suicide became a rite of passage, a thing you read late at night when you were a little too young to be reading it, and a thing that made you look at Squidward slightly differently forever after. The image that spread with the story, a drawing of Squidward with those hyper-realistic red eyes and blood dripping down his face, became one of the most widely shared horror images on the early internet. Many kids saw the image before they ever read the story. The reason the creepypasta worked, and the reason it stuck around so long, has to do with Squidward himself. Horror stories only land if they are aimed at a target the audience is already prepared to believe can break. Nobody writes a successful creepypasta about SpongeBob killing himself, because SpongeBob, by his own design, bounces back from anything. He is too cheerful. He is too elastic. The horror would not land because the character would not let it. Squidward, though, was already the character on the show who carried real sadness. Squidward was already the character who hated his job, resented his neighbors, felt unappreciated, and dreamed of a better life that never came. The show itself had been showing for years that Squidward experienced things the other characters did not. He got disappointed. He got humiliated. He got tired. He felt things the other characters either could not feel or would not admit to feeling. The creepypasta took those real aspects of his character, already established in the show, and pushed them to the worst possible place. It was horror that only worked because the character was already sad. That is the deepest reason the story lasted. It was not a random attack on a random cartoon. It was an extreme version of something the show itself had been honest about from the start. And then, 9 years after the original creepypasta was posted, something very strange happened. In 2019, during season 12 of SpongeBob, the writers released an episode called SpongeBob in Random Land. It was a silly, chaotic episode in which SpongeBob walks through a long hallway of doors, each door leading to a different, strange, alternate reality. The writers packed the episode full of quick, weird visual gags, each one flashing by fast enough that most viewers would not even process them. In one of those quick door sequences, for just a moment, a version of Squidward appeared on screen. The Squidward Squidward in that brief shot had the exact look of the creepypasta image. The dripping face, the red eyes, the tear streaks. The original scream from the creepypasta version was even included in the background audio. The show, on its own network, in its own continuing run, had quietly referenced the ghost story that had been haunting its fans for nearly a decade. This moment is the closest thing to an on-record acknowledgement that the creepypasta is now part of the show's larger cultural life, even if the story itself was never real. The writers clearly knew the image. They clearly knew what they were referencing, and they let it pass by on screen for a single flash, long enough for the fans who knew to catch it, and fast enough that casual viewers would miss it. The ghost story had become part of the world. The show had absorbed the nightmare and filed it away as a quick joke inside a quick gag. There is a final detail worth knowing about how much of an influence this one creepypasta had. Before Squidward's suicide, the genre of lost episode creepypastas was small and not very organized. After it, the genre exploded. Dozens, then hundreds of copycat stories appeared online, each one trying to follow the same template. A regular cartoon episode, a mysterious altered version, an innocent intern, hyper-realistic eyes, a hidden, disturbing ending. The phrase hyper-realistic eyes became so common that some creepypasta websites eventually had to ban lost episode submissions entirely because so many bad copies were flooding in. Squidward's suicide did not just shape how people saw SpongeBob, it shaped an entire style of internet horror writing. It is the single most copied horror story template of the early 2000s online. For the fans who grew up on it, the creepypasta is not separate from the show. It lives beside it. Many adults today, when they hear the word Squidward, still have that red-eyed image surface briefly in their minds, even if they have not thought about it in years. It is the dark twin of every warm, friendly Squidward moment in the real series. The show gave people a lonely, artistic, melancholy octopus trying to find happiness in a world that ignored him. The internet gave people a version of that same character where the loneliness won. Neither version is fully separable from the other now. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The story also serves as a reminder of something larger about the show. For a cartoon built on a sunny beach vibe and a hopeful theme song, SpongeBob has always had a strange relationship with darker feelings. The creepypasta used that relationship to its advantage, and eventually, something much bigger would come along and push the show away from the team that created it, away from its warmest years, toward a much stranger and more uneven chapter of its life. A movie would be released, a creator would walk away, a network would make a choice, and a show that was never supposed to keep going would, against its own maker's wishes, keep going anyway. Section 8, the movie that was supposed to end the show. By the time season 3 of SpongeBob wrapped up in 2004, Steven Hillenburg had been running his show for 5 years straight. He had written, produced, and overseen every single episode of the Golden Era. He had built a world from scratch, shepherded it through hundreds of hours of production, and watched it turn into one of the biggest animated hits Nickelodeon had ever aired. And he had made a decision, privately and then publicly, that most people did not expect. He wanted to end it. He wanted to stop the show while it was still great. The plan he had in mind for how to end it was simple. He would make a movie. The movie would serve as the final chapter, and then SpongeBob would ride off into the sunset, preserved as a tight 3-season, one-film story that never overstayed its welcome. That movie was released in theaters on November 19th, 2004. It was called The SpongeBob SquarePants Movie. It was directed by Hillenburg himself. He co-wrote the story with a team of trusted show writers, including Derek Dryman, Tim Hill, Kent Osborne, Aaron Springer, and Paul Tibbitt. The budget was $30 million, which is modest by movie standards, but big for an animated television show. The result made over $140 million at the box office worldwide. It received generally positive reviews from critics, a B+ grade from audiences, and it became, for a moment, proof that the show could fill theaters the way it filled living rooms. The plot of the film is a classic adventure story with a specific emotional core. Mr. Krabs opens a second location of the Krusty Krab, right next door to the original. SpongeBob is certain he will be picked as the manager of the new restaurant. He has poured years of his life into the Krusty Krab. He has flipped every patty with pride. He believes, fully, that this promotion is his. When the moment comes, Mr. Krabs passes him over. He tells SpongeBob, in front of everyone, that SpongeBob is too much of a kid for the job. He gives the promotion promotion to Squidward instead. SpongeBob is crushed. That single moment, a character being told he is not grown up enough for something he wants, is the emotional engine that powers the entire movie. SpongeBob and Patrick go to an ice cream parlor called the Goofy Goober, which is built like a kid's pizza arcade with a big cartoon peanut mascot. They drown their sadness in ice cream sundaes. The movie treats this ice cream binge like a drinking scene in an adult film, with the two of them getting louder and sloppier as the night goes on, waking up the next day with headaches, slurred speech, and hangovers. For an animated film aimed at children, this sequence is remarkably bold. It is a kids' movie being honest about what heartbreak feels like, dressed up in ice cream instead of alcohol, but treating the emotion as real. Meanwhile, Plankton hatches what he calls Plan Z. He steals the crown of King Neptune, the ruler of all the seas, and frames Mr. Krabs for the theft. King Neptune arrives at the Krusty Krab to execute Mr. Krabs as punishment. SpongeBob and Patrick, still dealing with the sting of SpongeBob's rejection, volunteer to travel to a far-off, forbidden place called Shell City to retrieve the stolen crown and save Mr. Krabs. Shell City is described as a dangerous region above the waves, where no sea creature has ever returned from. The heart of the story kicks in here. SpongeBob is setting out to prove he is grown up. He is going to save his boss, save Bikini Bottom, and finally earn the respect of the people who called him a kid. The road trip that follows is packed with memorable moments. They meet a princess named Mindy, who is Neptune's daughter, voiced by Scarlett Johansson. She gives them fake mustaches made of seaweed and convinces them they are now true men. They march forward, singing a song called Now That We're Men, acting as if putting on pretend mustaches has granted them real maturity, while the dangers around them get bigger and more threatening. They encounter a hitman named Dennis, voiced by Alec Baldwin, sent by Plankton to make sure they never make it back alive. They fall into a zone of the ocean that is quite literally dead, a dry and barren place where they begin to shrivel up from lack of water. In that low moment, lying on the ground, losing strength, they cry tears for the first time in the movie, and those tears short out a lamp above them, triggering the sprinklers of a sunken gift shop. They are revived. The sea creatures around them are revived. The adventure continues. The final sequence of the movie is where Hillenburg's intended message lands. SpongeBob and Patrick return to Bikini Bottom with the crown, just in time to save Mr. Krabs from execution. Plankton reveals the full scale of his plan. He has been brainwashing the citizens of Bikini Bottom with special bucket-shaped helmets. He drops one on King Neptune. His slaves surround SpongeBob, Patrick, and Mindy. It looks like he has won. And then SpongeBob delivers the movie's big speech. He tells Plankton, out loud and without shame, that yes, he is a kid. He is a goofy goober. He is immature, loud, silly, and proud of it. And he tells Plankton that being a kid did not stop him from crossing a dangerous ocean, defeating monsters, surviving Shell City, and coming home with the crown. Being a kid is not a weakness. It is the reason he could do any of this at all. He then uses an imaginary electric guitar to perform a full rock version of the Goofy Goober song, a parody of the real rock song I Wanna Rock by Twisted Sister. The music literally destroys Plankton's mind control helmets. The citizens are freed. Neptune takes back his crown. Plankton is arrested. And in the final scene, Mr. Krabs officially promotes SpongeBob to manager of the Krusty Krab 2. The kid grew up by staying a kid. That is the emotional ending of the entire movie. This is where Hillenburg meant to stop. The movie ends on a note of total completion. The hero has won. The boss has changed his mind. The villain is in prison. The world is safe. Every major storyline the show had been running is tied up. If this had been the final episode ever, the show would have had one of the cleanest finales in cartoon history. Nickelodeon had other plans. The movie made too much money, and the show was still Nickelodeon's biggest success. The network wanted more. They ordered more episodes. Hillenburg did not want to do this. He did not want to see his work stretched beyond its natural ending. He knew, by his own words in interviews, that he was afraid the show would lose its edge if it kept running. He resigned as the showrunner. He stayed on as an executive producer, still credited, still involved in some oversight, but he stopped running the daily creative work. His friend and trusted colleague Paul Tibbitt took over as the new showrunner. Many of the original writers and storyboard artists who had shaped the golden era left along with Hillenburg. The team that had built SpongeBob, for the most part, stepped aside. Hillenburg tried later to make peace with the decision. In some interviews, he offered an unusual explanation for how the newer episodes fit into the story. He said, essentially, that every SpongeBob episode aired after the movie should be thought of as happening before the movie. The movie, in his view, was still the ending. Anything that came later was not continuing the story forward. It was filling in extra stories from earlier in the characters' lives, stories that happened before the Krusty Krab 2 ever opened. This idea is sometimes called the everything is a prequel theory. It was Hillenburg's quiet way of protecting the emotional shape of his original story. The problem is that the show itself did not follow this idea. Later seasons continued to reference events from earlier seasons, treated the characters as unchanged, and never committed to any kind of prequel framing. The current showrunners have said clearly that the show simply runs on a floating sense of time, where nothing has to line up, and anything can contradict anything else. Hillenburg's prequel explanation remains, at best, a personal preference rather than an official rule. The movie's release also marked the end of another era in a quieter, more practical way. Because of the legal situation around the film, certain characters and places that were created for the movie were locked away from the television show for many years. King Neptune, Princess Mindy, Dennis the Hitman, the Goofy Goober restaurant, all of these were treated as movie-only properties for over a decade. It was not until around 2015, when the second movie was being made, that the television show was allowed to start including these characters again. This is the reason Goofy Goober and Mindy feel absent from most of the show's middle run. They were not forgotten. They were locked behind a legal wall. Looking back on the first movie now, it plays almost like a letter Hillenburg wrote to his own audience. He used his own main character to deliver a speech about why childishness is not a weakness, about how people who are called immature can still accomplish extraordinary things, about how the things that make you soft can also be the things that make you strong. That speech was the heart of the film, and it was, in many ways, the heart of the whole golden era. SpongeBob was not meant to grow up. That was the point. The audience was meant to let him stay the way he was. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Then the movie ended, and Hillenburg stepped away, and the show kept going. And for the next several years, viewers began to notice that something was different. The characters they had loved in the first 3 seasons were still there. The voices were still the same. The animation was still bright and sharp. But something in the way those characters behaved had shifted. They felt a little louder, a little meaner, a little less like themselves. Fans could not always put their finger on exactly what was wrong. Critics had a word for it, though. It was a word that had been used to describe this kind of change in cartoons long before SpongeBob existed. And once that word is understood, the decline of the post-movie era becomes impossible to unsee. Section 9, Flanderization, the decline, and the show that keeps returning to itself. The word is Flanderization, and it has a funny origin for a term that describes something sad. The word comes from a character on The Simpsons named Ned Flanders. In the earliest seasons of that show, Ned was a kind, generous neighbor who was mildly religious and happy to help anyone who needed it. Over the years, his religious side kept getting turned up by the writers, until eventually Ned was barely a person anymore. He was just a walking Bible thumper. That pattern, where a character starts out as a full, rounded person and slowly becomes nothing more than one exaggerated trait, showed up so often in long-running cartoons that television fans gave it a name in honor of the first character it happened to. When you hear people talking about a cartoon getting worse over time, Flanderization is usually what they are describing. SpongeBob, after the first movie, went through one of the most extreme cases of Flanderization that has ever been documented in a mainstream American cartoon. It happened to almost every single main character, and it started happening right away in season 4, the first season produced after Steven Hillenburg stepped down as showrunner. The signs were small at first. Fans watching in real time did not always know what was wrong. Critics did, though. Major publications, including MSN, the AV Club, and Vulture, began writing openly about a drop in quality. MSN in 2012 pointed to a fan-run wiki that noted how many fans believed the series had, in their words, jumped the shark after the release of the first movie. Online fan communities that had been full of life during the golden era were becoming quieter. Vulture, in a 2018 piece, made an even sharper observation. They noted that almost every viral SpongeBob meme ever shared online came from episodes in the first 3 seasons. The post-movie era, for all the episodes it produced, had barely contributed anything to the show's cultural memory. The AV Club put it plainly in their own 2018 writing, saying the show had leaned hard into physical humor and gross-out jokes that did not appeal to anyone in particular. The magic of the early years had been replaced with with something thinner. What was actually happening inside the show? Flanderization across every main character. Let us walk through each one. SpongeBob himself was the biggest casualty. In the early seasons, he was a full person. He could be cheerful, but he could also be sad, scared, embarrassed, frustrated, or quietly hurt. In the post-movie era, almost all of those other shades started to shrink. SpongeBob became louder, his laugh got higher, his enthusiasm got cranked up to a level that stopped being sweet and started being painful. In some episodes, he began crying at the smallest setbacks, often with huge, gushing fountains of tears spraying out of his face. His pure innocence, which had been his greatest quality, started to tip over into something closer to pure annoyance. He stopped being a lovable weirdo and started being, in many episodes, the character viewers wanted to escape from. Patrick went through an even steeper drop. In the early seasons, Patrick was slow and simple, but he was also kind, loyal, and occasionally insightful. He had moments of real wisdom hidden underneath his goofy outer shell. In the post-movie era, his slowness got turned into outright helplessness. He became so dumb that he could no longer function in basic situations. He forgot how to eat. He forgot who his friends were. He started acting openly cruel to SpongeBob in some episodes, not out of meanness, but out of sheer brain fog. The dumber Patrick got, the less he could do anything. The less he could do anything, the harder it became to write stories for him. His friendship with SpongeBob, which had been the emotional center of so many early episodes, started to look less like a friendship and more like a caretaker trying to keep a broken character from walking off a cliff. Squidward took the worst hit of the entire cast. In the early seasons, Squidward had been mean, yes, but he had also been a full person with hopes and dreams. He was the character the audience quietly rooted for, even when he was being grumpy, because the writers respected him enough to give him real feelings. In the post-movie era, the writers started using Squidward almost entirely as a punching bag. He got hit by things, he got crushed, he got humiliated, he got burned, he got tortured for entire episodes at a time. The show seemed to find his suffering funny in a way it never had before. Many fans point to this era as the moment Squidward stopped being a character and started being a target. His old musical dreams, his old artistic ambition, his old moments of quiet happiness, all of these started to disappear. What was left was a character whose whole role in the show was to have bad things happen to him on camera. Mr. Krabs went from greedy to something much darker. In the early seasons, his money obsession was played for comedy. He loved money. He counted every penny. He yelled at his employees for wasting pennies. And it was funny because it never actually hurt anyone in a serious way. In the post-movie era, his greed began to tip into cruelty. He started doing things that crossed lines the old show had never crossed. The worst example is the season 7 episode One Course Meal from 2010. In that episode, Mr. Krabs discovers that Plankton is terrified of whales, so he decides to mess with him by dressing up as Pearl, his own daughter, and using her face to scare Plankton over and over. The campaign of terror drives Plankton into such a deep depression that he stops leaving his restaurant, and in one scene, Plankton is shown lying in the middle of a road, waiting for a bus to run him over. The episode treats this as a joke. The darkness of it shocked even longtime SpongeBob fans. It remains one of the single most criticized episodes in the entire run of the show, widely pointed to as proof that something had gone deeply wrong in the writer's room. The old Mr. Krabs would never have done something that cruel. The post-movie Mr. Krabs was willing to drive another character to the edge for a laugh. There is a production reason for a lot of this, and it is worth understanding. After season 5, Nickelodeon raised the number of episodes the show was producing each season. The order went from 20 episodes per season, which meant 40 11-minute segments, to 26 episodes per season, which meant 52 segments. That is a 30% jump in the amount of content the writers had to produce every year. Without Hillenburg in the room to slow things down and protect the quality, the writers had to keep the machine running faster than it was ever meant to run. When a show is pushed to produce more than it can handle, the easy way out is to lean on the most obvious, most exaggerated versions of each character. The thoughtful moments take longer to write. The loud, dumb, exaggerated moments can be written quickly. The math of the production schedule nudged the writers toward the exact kind of writing that flanderization thrives on. The seasons where the show hit its absolute lowest point are widely agreed on by the fan community. Seasons 6, 7, and 8 are considered the worst stretch. The show was still producing episodes, still airing on Nickelodeon, still making money, but the creative quality was at its its lowest. Many fans and critics consider the Season 9A episode SpongeBob You're Fired, which aired in 2013, to be one of the most disappointing episodes in the entire series. In that episode, Mr. Krabs lays off SpongeBob to save a penny. SpongeBob spends most of the episode homeless, wandering, humiliated. The tone is grim and uncomfortable. Another low point is the Season 9A episode Little Yellow Book, in which Squidward reads SpongeBob's private diary to a crowd of strangers, broadcasting his most personal secrets for laughs. The episode treats this invasion of privacy as a comedy routine and asks the audience to laugh along with the betrayal. A third widely disliked episode from this stretch is Squid Baby, where Squidward hits his head and reverts to acting like an infant for the entire 11 minutes, with the show finding humor in his regression. These 3 episodes have become symbols of how far the show had drifted from what it used to be. And yet, in the middle of this decline, something unexpected kept happening. The show occasionally produced episodes that felt like the old SpongeBob coming back to life. The weirdest and most interesting of these is the Season 8 episode Are You Happy Now?, which aired in 2012. The plot is as dark as anything the show has ever attempted. SpongeBob asks Squidward what his happiest memory is. Squidward realizes, to his horror, that he does not have one. The realization sends him into a deep depression. He stops leaving his house. His beard grows out. He stops answering the phone. SpongeBob spends the back half of the episode trying desperately to help his friend, but every attempt fails. The episode even includes 2 specific moments where it looks, at first glance, like Squidward is about to end his own life. In one, he appears to be hanging himself, but the rope turns out to be hoisting up a clam cage. In another, he appears to be sticking his head in the oven, but he is actually just taking brownies out. The show sets up these fake-out moments on purpose, fully aware of what they look like, and trusts the audience to go through the momentary panic before the reveal. Are You Happy Now is a bizarre episode. It is dark in a way the show almost never is. Fans who loved it defended it as proof that the writers still had range. Fans who hated it called it irresponsible, arguing that a children's cartoon should not make those kinds of jokes, even as fake-outs. Either way, the episode is a strange little signal. Years after the show had supposedly lost its way, the writers could still produce something strange, emotional, and complicated. They just did it less often than they used to. The show started to climb back up in Season 9B and into Seasons 10, 11, and 12. Critics and longtime fans noticed a real improvement. The characters started behaving more like themselves. The episodes started slowing down and trusting their own jokes. Moments of the old warmth returned. Hillenburg had come back to more active involvement in the show by around 2015, after the second movie was finished, and many of the crew members working on the show during this stretch have said in interviews that Hillenburg attended every writing session and every recording session during his final years. His presence, even as he grew sick, stabilized the show. The golden era could not be recreated exactly, but the post-Hillenburg return episodes had a kind of quiet care that the middle years had lost. The show, in its own halting way, was remembering itself. What all of this reveals is a strange truth about SpongeBob. The show is not one thing. It is really several different shows, layered on top of each other, each one trying to do something slightly different. The golden era was a marine biologist's love letter to the ocean, made by a team of artists at the peak of their powers. The middle decline era was a content machine, pushed past its limits by a network that would not let it rest. The recovery era was a show trying to remember what it used to be while running at an unnatural pace. Inside all of these layers, there were always occasional surprises, like Are You Happy Now?, that reminded fans the show was still capable of doing something unusual. The decline was real. The recovery was also real, and both are part of the full story of what this show became. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The man at the center of all of it, the one who had created the characters, the town, the tone, and the worldview, was by this point fighting for his own life in a way the audience did not yet know about. While the show was still airing new episodes every week, its creator was quietly dealing with a diagnosis that would change everything. And the way he chose to spend his final years, even after that diagnosis, says more about who Stephen Hillenburg really was than any episode of the show ever could. Section 10. Hillenburg's Final Years, the Sweet Victory Moment, and What He Left Behind. Stephen Hillenburg had stepped away from the daily running of SpongeBob in 2004, but he never fully let the show go. For about a decade after the first movie, he stayed on as an executive producer, which meant he still had a voice in in what happened, but he was not involved in the week-to-week work. He used that free time to make short films again, the way he had in his California art school days. He made a piece called Hollywood Boulevard, USA in 2013, a gentle, almost sleepy short about people walking around a real Los Angeles street. It did not look anything like SpongeBob. It looked like the quiet, thoughtful work of a man who had spent most of his life working on a loud cartoon and now wanted to sit in silence for a while. It played at a handful of film festivals. Almost nobody outside the animation world saw it. Hillenburg did not seem to mind. He was, by every account of the people who worked with him, a private man who preferred being at home with his wife and son over being anywhere in public. Then, in 2015, a second SpongeBob film was released. It was called The SpongeBob Movie, Sponge Out of Water. Hillenburg had been involved in writing the story and serving as an executive producer. The film brought him closer to the show again, and by January of that year, he had officially returned to full, active work on SpongeBob. Vincent Waller, one of the main creative people still running the production, has said in interviews that once Hillenburg came back, he was in every meeting, every writing session, and every voice recording session. He was not showing up as a name on a letterhead. He was in the room, doing the work, the way he had in the early days. What the audience did not know is that he was already sick. In March of 2017, Hillenburg gave an interview to Variety magazine and publicly shared news that had not been out before. He had been diagnosed with a disease called amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, which most people know by its shorter name, ALS. It is sometimes also called Lou Gehrig's disease, named after a famous baseball player who died of it in the 1940s. ALS is a serious illness. It affects the nerve cells in the brain and spinal cord that control movement. Over time, the disease makes it harder and harder for a person to move, speak, eat, and eventually breathe. There is no cure. Most people diagnosed with it live for only a few years after their diagnosis. When Hillenburg shared the news, he made it clear in his own words that he planned to keep working on SpongeBob for as long as he physically could. He asked for privacy for himself and his family, thanked people for their support, and then did exactly what he had said he would do. He kept working. The people around him have described what those last years looked like. His speech gradually got harder. Simple conversations started taking more effort. He began to lose some of his mobility. Eventually, he stopped coming into the office because the illness had progressed to the point where it was too difficult. But before that, he was still in the building, still reading scripts, still weighing in on designs, still caring, with the same quiet perfectionism he had shown from the beginning about whether a single joke was landing the way it was supposed to. His colleagues have said that he was a workaholic in a gentle way, the kind of person who would never raise his voice about a mistake, but would quietly want to get every detail right. He kept being that person through his illness. Vincent Waller has confirmed, publicly, that the last SpongeBob episode to be fully finished before Hillenburg passed away was called Pineapple RV. It aired after his death, but was completed while he was still alive. The last episode to actually air during his lifetime was called Goons on the Moon. That episode broadcast in November of 2018, just a few weeks before the end. Hillenburg died on Monday, November 26, 2018, at his home in San Marino, California. He was 57 years old. According to his death certificate, he was cremated, and the following day, his ashes were scattered in the Pacific Ocean off the coast of California. The man who had turned a Tide Pool comic book into a 20-year television empire, the man who had spent his whole career turning his love of the ocean into art, was returned to the ocean itself. It was the ending he would have written if he had written it himself. Nickelodeon released a statement that afternoon. They called him a beloved friend and a longtime creative partner. They said he had imbued SpongeBob with a unique sense of humor and innocence that had brought joy to generations of kids and families everywhere. They said his characters and the world of Bikini Bottom would long stand as a reminder of the value of optimism, friendship, and the limitless power of imagination. These statements are often written in advance by marketing departments and handed out to the press the moment someone dies. This one felt different. The people who had worked most closely with Hillenburg, the voice actors, the animators, the writers, all began posting their own tributes, and every single one of them said roughly the same thing. He was quiet, he was kind, he was obsessed with getting things right. He loved his wife, his son, the ocean, and the work. What happened after his death turned into one of the most unusual tributes in the history of American entertainment. A fan named Kevin Rotuna started a petition on the website Change.org, asking the National Football League to play the song Sweet Victory, the famous song from the Band Geeks episode, during the halftime show of the upcoming Super Bowl. Super Bowl 53 was going to be held in Atlanta on February 3rd, 2019, just a couple of months after Hillenburg's passing. The petition picked up signatures at a pace nobody expected. Within weeks, it had hundreds of thousands of signatures. Within a short time, it had over 1.1 million. The movement spread across social media, across sports forums, across generations. People who had grown up watching Band Geeks were now adults, and they collectively decided that the best tribute they could give to the man who had made them laugh as children was to get his song onto the biggest stage in American sports. The Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta, which was hosting the Super Bowl, posted a scene from Band Geeks on its Twitter account. The halftime show's headlining band, Maroon 5, put out a teaser video that included a clip of SpongeBob. The signs were pointing in one direction. The NFL seemed to be preparing to actually do it. Fans around the world, ready to watch a football game, were also waiting to hear those opening notes of Sweet Victory ring out during the halftime break. The night came, the halftime show began, and the tribute came, in a smaller form than most fans were hoping for. The show used a short clip of Squidward and a brief snippet of the Bubble Bowl performance, which served mainly as an announcement for the entrance of the guest rapper Travis Scott. The moment was quick. Sweet Victory was not performed in full. The tribute to Hillenburg that so many people had fought for was reduced to a few seconds of setup for someone else's performance. The reaction was mixed. Some fans loved that any tribute made it in at all. Many others felt disappointed and cheated. They had expected the song. They had worked for the song. They had signed the petition for the song. What they got was a brief cartoon cutaway. What happened next showed just how much the audience actually cared. In the days after the Super Bowl, on-demand streams of Sweet Victory exploded. The song had been streamed around 46,000 times on February 1st and 2nd. By February 3rd and 4th, just after the halftime show, streams jumped to 310,000. That is a 566% increase in 2 days. The song entered the Billboard charts in the United States. It reached number 23 on the Hot Rock Songs chart and number 2 on the Kid Digital Song Sales chart, sitting just behind another song called Baby Shark, an 18-year-old cartoon song from an 11-minute episode about an octopus trying to lead a marching band, was suddenly one of the most streamed songs in America. Fans had found a way to honor Hillenburg on their own, even after the NFL's tribute fell short. There were more tributes after that. The third SpongeBob feature film, the SpongeBob movie Sponge on the Run, was released in 2020. Hillenburg received a posthumous executive producer credit on the film. The movie was dedicated to him. The 20th anniversary special, called SpongeBob's Big Birthday Blowout, was also dedicated to him. His name still appears in the opening credits of every new episode, every new spin-off, every new product. The companies that run SpongeBob today are careful, in their own way, to make sure the man who built the whole thing is never removed from the credits. He is, by contract and by choice, still the creator. The show itself has, of course, continued. Since his death, SpongeBob has produced multiple new seasons, with a 16th season premiering in 2025. The show is now the 4th longest-running American animated series in history. It is the longest-running American children's animated series. It has won 4 Emmy Awards, 6 Annie Awards, 8 Golden Reel Awards, 2 BAFTA Children's Awards, and 22 Kids' Choice Awards, which is a record. Its merchandise has generated over $16 billion in lifetime retail sales as of 2024. Those numbers are the corporate version of the story. The real version is the one you can see in any coffee shop, any classroom, any subway ride, any group chat, anywhere on the internet. SpongeBob is everywhere. His face is one of the most recognizable faces in the world. His quotes have become the everyday language of 2 full generations of people. Mocking SpongeBob, tired SpongeBob, exhausted Squidward at his desk, shocked SpongeBob, Patrick angrily pointing at something off-screen, the imagination rainbow SpongeBob. All of these have become ways that adults communicate feelings to each other online when regular words stop being enough. Hillenburg himself once tried to explain what he had been trying to do with the show. He said, more than once, that he had wanted to make a show about a character who was an innocent, someone naive and well-meaning, placed in a world of more cynical characters. He said the contrast was what he found funny. He said he thought kids liked the show for the same reason adults liked it, because the adults were often adults who wished they were still kids. That small explanation, given quietly in various interviews interviews over the years may be the best description ever given of what makes SpongeBob work. He built a character who refused to be beaten down by a world that wanted to beat him down, and then he invited the audience to imagine what it would be like to refuse in the same way. He also built something bigger than a show. He built a private language that people now use to say things they cannot say directly. When someone shares a Squidward meme to describe their own quiet sadness, they are borrowing from Hillenburg. When someone shares a SpongeBob meme to describe their own tired hope, they are borrowing from him too. The theories that have grown up around the show, the nuclear testing story, the 7 deadly sins, the lost episode horror, the cannibal rumor, all of them are the audience's way of holding on to a world that feels too alive to be only a cartoon. Each theory is, in its own way, a form of refusing to let the show be small, refusing to let the creator go. The man is gone. The ocean he loved is still there. The show he built is still there. The characters he pulled out of his own life are still showing up every week on television screens around the world, doing the things he designed them to do, carrying the personalities he gave them, living in the town he named after a real piece of 20th century history. A marine biologist who never meant to make a cartoon ended up making the most watched American children's animated series in history. A man who said he loved the ocean had his ashes returned to the ocean. A song from a single 11-minute episode of his show ended up on the Billboard charts because over 1 million strangers wanted to honor him. That is the real story of SpongeBob SquarePants. Not just the characters, not just the theories, not just the episodes, but the life of the man who made all of it possible, and the quiet way his work has kept moving through the world long after he stopped being here to see it. Somewhere, under the water, a pineapple is still sitting on the seafloor. A yellow sponge inside it is still, every morning, waking up and getting ready for the best day ever. And that, maybe, is the closest thing to an ending that a show like this was ever going to have. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.